Welcome, everyone. Thank, thank you for being here. We're still admitting people to the waiting room, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for taking the time to attend the Chancellor's third annual Mental Health and Wellness lecture series. We've had just tons of interest in this series, and we're so grateful that you're taking time in the middle of your day to be here. It is my pleasure to introduce the Chancellor of Rutgers, New Brunswick, who puts these series together each year, Francine Conway. Dr. Conway has a big task, serving as the Chancellor for over 40,000 students and 10,000 faculty or staff. And at Rutgers, we have the pleasure of having a leader who puts mental health and wellness first. This series is just one of many, many different examples of where Chancellor Conway does this. Chancellor Conway is a distinguished professor in the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, where she previously served as dean, and she is a psychologist herself, with internationally known for her work in ADHD. So thank you for your leadership in taking the time to organize this series.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Josh. It's truly a joy to welcome you to the Chancellor's third annual Mental Health and Wellness Lecture Series. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Josh Langberg, who also double duty serves as our Chief Wellness Officer for the campus. And really thanks to his colleagues at the Gazap Center for Youth Social Emotional Wellness for their leadership in organizing this very meaningful series. They've done all the hard work. I just get to be proud of it and to be a cheerleader for the work that they've been doing. So Dr. Langberg, thank you. So as a psychologist, I know how essential it is to bring evidence-based knowledge into the spaces where people live, learn, and grow. And as a leader, I have seen how mental health and well-being are inseparable from learning, creativity, and community. When our students, families, and colleagues feel seen, supported, and safe, everything else, growth, achievement, connection, all becomes possible. This year's theme, evidence-based strategies for supporting youth, social, and emotional wellness, speaks directly to that truth. Each of the sessions in this series addresses a core aspect of the human experience: parenting, suicide prevention, sleep, ADHD, anxiety. These are not abstract topics. They touch our classrooms, they touch our families and friends, and they at times touch our own lives. For me, this work is personal. I became a psychologist because I believe in the power of science informed by empathy, and in the idea that access to well-being is a matter of equity. And here at Rutgers, New Brunswick, that belief aligns deeply with our commitment to serving the public good. We see our role not only as advancing knowledge, but as translating that knowledge into action that strengthens communities, supports families, and expands opportunities for all. So I want to thank each of you for being here, for your commitment to learning, for caring, and for helping us and joining forces as we advance wellness into our communities. And to Dr. Langberg and all of today's speakers, thank you for bringing your expertise and your heart to this very important work. Together, we're building not just healthier individuals, but stronger, more compassionate communities, much needed in our world today. So thank you so much and enjoy the series.
Thank you, Chancellor Conway. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to briefly say that if you signed up to get continuing education credits for the talk, please note that attendance is taken from the participant list. So we'd want to make sure that you're logged in for the webinar and that your full first and last name are showing. If they're not showing, you would want to click on your name and the menu option rename so that we can see your first and last name and mark you as here. And then please complete the survey at the end of the webinar. If you didn't register for continuing education credits but want them, we're going to paste the registration link in the chat. Given the size of the audience, we're going to ask that you use the chat for questions, and we'll monitor the chat and give them to our speaker as time permits at the end. So, and with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Andrea Temkin-Yu, who is an assistant professor of psychology and psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medicine. She earned her degree here at Rutgers in the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology and completed her postdoctoral fellowship through the Weill Cornell Medicine Center for Youth Mental Health. Dr. Temkin-Yu is a licensed clinical psychologist in both New Jersey and New York. She specializes in evidence-based treatment for youth and young adults and is a true expert in parenting interventions. She's the author of a new book, Supporting Your Teen's Mental Health, and has really dedicated her research and clinical career and efforts to increasing access to effective parenting tools. She focuses a lot on the development of interventions that can be used across diagnoses or transdiagnostic interventions, and the use of technology to bring cognitive behavioral and parent management skills to parents. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be talking today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, both, professionally, but I am also the parent of two young kids. So talking today about, parenting strategies to build connection and decrease problem behaviors, I think is really, really important. So, as I talk today, I'm going to talk through skills in the way that I would if I was in session with a parent. So if you're a parent, you can think a little bit about how these skills might apply to your own life. And if you're a provider, you have a sense of how you might bring these strategies into your parenting work. Just a quick disclosure, I'll discuss several skills and strategies that I write about in my book, and I receive royalties from Oxford University Press on book purchases. So we're going to start today by talking about focusing on connection, why this is so important, and how we can do that as parents. And why does this matter? I recognize this feels maybe like a throwaway slide. Of course, connection matters, but I think there's a little bit more than just the obvious. So, of course, it's going to feel better. If parents feel connected to kids, if kids feel connected to their parents, we're all just a better place. We can perspective take more effectively. We're more interested in treating other people kindly, right? And that can then in turn lower problem behaviors. There's less angst, less frustration, less resentment. If we have fewer problem behaviors, we have less conflict. And again, that's lovely on any given day, but it's also important long-term. If we have fewer battles day to day, we're going to have a better long-term relationship. And again, of course, I want that just because I want parents and kids to have a good relationship in time, but it's also really strategic. So if you're the parent of a young child, 3, 5, 9, whatever, you have a fair amount of control over what they do. But as your kids get older, you have less and less control, right? That 12-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old, 25-year-old, you have much less say in what they do. If we've really invested in a strong connection, even though you can't make decisions for them, you can maintain influence in their lives. If you've burnt those bridges and that connection's really brittle, we have much less influence as our kids get older. So the very first step to building connection is just getting everyone on the same page, meaning how can parents sort of understand what is happening in their kids' brains and bodies? And this seems really obvious, I think, right? Of course, we want to know what's happening with our kids. But I find that it's a step that seems to get shortchanged. So when parents come to see me, I'm maybe the second or third or even the sixth provider that they've worked with. And when I go through some basic background information on things like how anxiety manifests or what's happening in the brain if a kid has ADHD or what to do with potty training or anything like that, sometimes it feels like parents' brains are just blown, right? It's like they've never heard this information before. And of course, I recognize that as parents, we're busy, we're stressed. Maybe we have heard some of this before and we've forgotten. But I have a feeling that a lot of clinicians actually sort of forget to give enough background information on what's happening in kids. And they do that with good intentions, right? They don't want to bore parents. I think a lot of clinicians don't want to be patronizing and make it seem like, hey, I know your kid better than you do. And sometimes clinicians are just trying to be really helpful and jump to the recommendation piece before getting, prior to getting into the background. But I'm going to really recommend against that. And as parents, trying to advocate for a clearer picture of what's happening with your child. And for providers, trying not to skip ahead, even if we feel pressure to sort of get to the meat. And why does this matter so much, right? If we all have the same background information, if we have a clearer picture of what's really going on with our kids, parents are going to view their kids' behavior through a much different lens. Rather than feeling like their kids are being manipulative or complaining or frustrating or whatever it is, they might have a clearer sense of how their kid is stuck and how they as parents are accidentally sort of exacerbating issues, right? So we really want to get on the same page. Once we're on the same page, it's really crucial to have parents look for context, meaning in what context is their kid's behavior happening? And we call this functional assessment, but we're really just talking about pattern recognition. And often parents come in and they want help solving a particular issue that's happening right now. And that makes sense because as parents, we're desperate to fix the problem issues as they bump up. But if we skip straight to throwing out a bunch of recommendations, we lose the chance for parents to understand how to look for patterns in behavior and how to intervene on their own. So it's the difference between giving the person the fish versus teaching them how to fish. So there's 3 phases to any given situation. We have context, action, and results. Context being what's going on in my child's life that influences their behavior. Action being what is your child doing in this moment, and results being the outcome, what happens next. As parents, it's really easy to focus on the action and the results. And again, this makes sense. Parents are super busy. They're juggling 100 things at a time. Our brains are only going to spend so much energy on the problem right now. But when we do that, when we forget to focus on context, we majorly miss out on opportunities to figure out how to prevent problems from occurring before they even do. And there's 2 kinds of context that I want parents to be paying attention to. The first is big picture environment, and the second is in the moment. And we're going to talk through both of these. So what do I mean by big picture environment? Kids have a lot going on. If parents have a busy work schedule, if they're traveling, if they come home stressed from work, it's going to trickle down to home interactions. Kids are dealing with peer stuff, friendship stuff, drama, getting into the friend group, the fight that came up, partnerships. Academic pressures, right? It's really stressful for kids at every stage, especially as we're moving into high school and we're doing college applications and all of that stuff. Social media, right? Kids are having to navigate all of the social media content and the peer pressures to be online and feeling missed out and all this content that, our generation didn't have to deal with. We've got sports, we've got after school hobbies, adding to your resume when you're in middle school. And then we have physical needs. Are kids sleeping enough? Are they hungry? How are they doing with basic temperature regulation, right? All of this stuff matters in terms of how our kids act day to day, but it's really easy to forget. So my clearest example of this was in the middle of COVID, and I had all these parents in my virtual office just panicking because their kids' symptoms were getting worse. And they kept saying, Andrea, I don't get it. Why is everything going through the roof? I don't understand what's happening. Meanwhile, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Kids' entire lives are in upheaval. Parents knew that, but it's easy to forget how much that impacts kids day to day, right? So we need to keep sort of shifting our attention to keep in mind this big picture. If we miss it, we often try to solve problems that weren't really the root of the issue, so those issues just continue on and on. We also want to pay closer attention to the in-the-moment factors that might be influencing a kid's behavior. So is there enough structure? Most kids do better with structure. We tend to see more problem behaviors when there's less structure. Is it a new versus familiar situation? We tend to see more acting out when there's a new setting or expectations aren't as clear. Are there unmet physical needs or discomfort? This happens all the time, right? My 6-year-old, not great at realizing he should probably take the sweater off when he gets overheated, and then we have a meltdown on our hands. Is it a challenging task versus easy task, or an engaging versus a boring task? Things that are harder and less engaging are going to use up all those emotional and intellectual capacity much quicker, and then we're much more likely to see outbursts or problem behaviors emerge. Same is true for adults, right? Time of day. Kids are different. Some kids do really well in the morning. Some kids do really well in the evening. If I have a teenager who doesn't really wake up until noon on a Saturday, I probably don't want to have the chores set to be done by 11:30 a.m., right? I'm sort of asking for a fight. So we want parents to be thinking about, in any given moment, across days, across weeks, are there patterns to the factors that influence my kid that make it easier for them to engage appropriately or inappropriately? If we can understand these contextual factors, both the big picture and the in the moment, then we have a couple of things we can do, right? The first is we can actually help change the environment to be a better fit for my kid. If I know that my kid gets really hangry and that's when we get meltdowns, I definitely have a bunch of snacks on hand, right? If I know that my kid really finds math super hard and it's really frustrating and every night homework is a battle, maybe I'm thinking about a tutor to make sure it's not quite as difficult and painful for them, right? So if parents can do a better job of understanding patterns, they can tweak those patterns to better suit their kids' needs. But there's also some factors that we don't want to change or I can't change. So I'm not going to tell my kid who hates math, don't worry, just never do math ever again, right? And maybe I'm doing the tutor, but it's still really tricky on any given night. If I remember that fact, that this is hard for my kid, it makes them feel awful. Now, instead of viewing the pushback as my kid being a pain in the butt, I'm much more likely to approach them with empathy. Right? If I can do that, we can sort of work together as a team rather than butting heads all the time. So sort of two major points I want to drive home. If parents can identify patterns to their kids' behavior, they have a much better chance of being able to intervene with new behaviors that pop up over time because you can see it coming, right? And if we can get parents to invest more in antecedent management, meaning trying to prevent problems before they occur, we're going to way reduce the amount of emotional turmoil for the parents and the kids. And to be clear, antecedent management is not pain-free, right? It's a lot of work to catalog, predict, intervene preemptively for all the things that impact my kid. But I can put in that effort up front, or I can wait till the back end when all the problem behaviors would emerge. So if I'm going to put in effort anyways, I'd rather do it first and save ourselves the angst and the resentment that builds if we don't. Okay, once we have a better sense of patterns of behavior, the next thing we're going to do to build connection is actively invest in filling that attention cup. And we're humans, we're social creatures, right? We like to engage with people around us. And this is particularly true for kids interacting with their parents. They really want parental attention. So the first thing we're going to do with this is up the one-on-one time. And this is based on special time from parent-child interaction therapy, which is an evidence-based treatment for younger kids, roughly 2 to 6, initially developed for kids with disruptive behavior, ADHD. It's since been adapted to help all sorts of kids. So what I'm going to describe is not special time exactly, but we want to think about those principles and how it can apply to any family. In one-on-one time, you're aiming for a 5-minute daily dose of positive attention. This interaction is specifically designed to go well because kids and parents need that dose of feeling good about each other. To do that, we're going to let our kid pick the activity within reason, right? So for little kids, it's going to be, magnet tiles or building blocks or drawing or something like that. With big kids, it can be making a snack or playing with the dog or going for a walk, whatever it is, right? This is really your kid's chance to pick and choose what they do, again, assuming it's within house rules. Within that 5 minutes, there's a couple skills that we want parents to be working on. The first one is praising what their kid is doing well. Thanks for being flexible. Thanks for spending this time with me. It's great to see how patient you can be. I love how you told me what was going on. It's so great to see you doing this thing that you love, right? We're just trying to infuse this interaction with lots of warmth and positivity and highlight the behaviors or the traits that we love to see in our kids. We're also going to practice reflecting what our kids say. So when they say, I hate the blue blocks, we are going to say, oh, you hate the blue blocks. Or if they say, oh, I hate the smoothie that we made, we're going to say, oh, you hate the smoothie that you made. And that's a little different than how parents typically respond, which is usually trying to get our kid to see the silver lining and problem solve. So typically, if a kid says, I hate the smoothie we made, our gut is to say something like, what do you mean you worked so hard on it? Or what are you talking about? You love bananas and blueberries. Why would you hate the smoothie? But as soon as we do that, we kind of shut the conversation down. If you just reflect, you're much more likely to get your kid to keep talking. And this really matters in day-to-day life. So if you can picture a kid coming home from school and saying, oh my God, I had the worst day. I just hate my teacher. She's awful. Again, our typical gut response as the parent is to say something like, what did you do? Or what do you mean you love your teacher? And as soon as we do that, the kid is on the defensive. They don't want to tell us more. They feel like we never side with them. And now we've totally lost our opportunity to connect and help them. If instead we've practiced our good reflection in one-on-one time, where it's just play, right? And I can use that in real life. Oh my gosh, you hate your teacher, ... Now I'm much more likely to stay engaged. My kid feels more supported. Maybe down the road, we can actually problem solve. And then you're going to engage in what they're doing, meaning we're not cooking dinner during one-on-one time. We're not answering emails. If at all possible, we're not wrangling the other kids in the house, right? We're really trying to give a positive dose of attention, and that's going to fill that attention cup for you and your kids. So you're going to feel really good. Like I mentioned, for little kids, these can be sort of fun, building creative activities. The more open-ended, the better, because there's less rules, less places for conflict. If you have bigger kids who want to do other stuff, that's okay. If they want to throw a ball, if they want to, again, make the snack, that's all right. Just want to keep in mind that this isn't the time for you to course correct their behavior. So if they want to kick the soccer ball in the backyard with you for their one-on-one time, that's awesome. You're not going to be coaching them on how to do it better. Save that for later. This is just about a nice dose of attention. For families who have older kids, teenagers who have no interest in spending time with one-on-one with mom and dad, that's totally okay. We're going to do conflict-free zone. This is just 15 to 20 minutes where the parent is specifically aiming not to start fights with their kids, which is actually maybe a little harder to do than we think it might be, especially because teenagers aren't necessarily known for spending all their free time in the living room, right? They're coming in little fits and bursts, and as parents, we feel really compelled to jump on the opportunity when we see them and remind them of the chem test and ask them if they took out the trash and let them know their least favorite cousin is coming to town this weekend, right? But when we do that, those interactions get really fraught. Kid is just waiting for you to jump on them. You're waiting them to be frustrated. Everyone's just walking on eggshells, and we're much less likely to have time together because everyone's going to start avoiding it. Conflict-free zone, again, 15 to 20 minutes where you're specifically not asking about the chem test and you're not reminding them of the chores or the family dinner this weekend. We just want parents and kids to know that you can kind of coexist without it turning into a fight. Try to build that connection over time. All right. Last skill I want to talk about in terms of building connection is just demonstrating understanding. How can you show your kid that you can see where they're coming from? And we're going to do this with validation. And I know this is a very sort of buzzwordy term right now. By validation, I mean showing your kid that you can see where they're coming from. You can understand their perspective. And there's a couple of really lovely benefits to validation. The first is it can build trust and communication. If kids feel like you understand where they're coming from, you're not judging them, you're hearing them out, that feels really good. I'm much more likely to continue talking to you over time if it seems like you get it. It can also decrease the chance of outbursts. So again, as humans, we often just want to feel like the person across from us can understand us. They can see the experience that we're having. And when it doesn't happen, it's almost a little panic-inducing, right? I'm sure everyone on the call has had an experience where you were trying to tell a partner or a coworker or a parent something that was going wrong, and they said, I don't really see what the big deal is. Or, well, haven't you just tried X? And it's really agitating when that happens. That's certainly the case for our kids too. So if they feel like you don't understand or you're being dismissive or you're questioning their judgment or decision-making, it's really sort of frantic, right? And kids are much more likely to have outbursts. If instead we can say, man, that sounds really brutal. Or, oh, of course you felt really anxious about that. It's like a big sigh of relief, right? Kids are much more likely to stay calm. Validation can also increase openness to change. If mom understands me, if she's really showing that she can see how hard this is for me, I'm much more likely to listen to her suggestions. If I don't think mom gets my perspective, why would I listen to her solution? She doesn't get it. She doesn't understand me. She doesn't know me, right? Why would I listen to her problem solving? If we can really go heavy on validation, much more likely to have kids meet us halfway. Last thing is validation can go a long way at reducing shame, right? So a lot of people feel feelings and then they have feelings about those feelings. They feel anxious and then they're really sad they're so anxious, or they're angry and then they feel guilty for feeling so angry. And that just reduces that, that increases that sense of suffering over time. If parents can come in a validating way, I really understand why you're so angry. Totally makes sense that you're anxious about that. It really normalizes these very typical emotional reactions. That doesn't mean you're approving of every decision your kid is making. It's just saying, I can see where you're coming from, and we can reduce that sense of shame that builds over time for having emotions that kids didn't necessarily have control over in the first place. So to be clear, validation is not agreeing with your child. It's not approving of their behavior. It's not lowering your expectations. It's not changing your limits. When my 3-year-old knocks down the blocks my 6-year-old was building, and my 6-year-old gets really angry and then hits my 3-year-old, he's still in timeout, right? Because he broke the house rule. But I can still say, man, I get why you're so angry now. You worked really hard on that. So parents are welcome to stick with their limits. We can still make use of validation to help our kids feel understood. So let's go through a couple of examples because I think validation is actually sort of easier said than done. Let's say you have a child who's worried about starting a new club. And our typical parent response is something like, I'm sure it will be just fine. And then our kid rolls their eyes and they say, oh, you don't get it. And they stomp off, right? Instead, we might say, it makes sense that you're anxious because it's hard to start new things. And you know what? It is hard to start new things. It actually does make total sense that our kid is anxious. If we can validate that, kids, again, going to feel less shame for their response. They're more likely to talk it out and they feel like we understand where they're coming from. Let's say we have a teen who's mad about grade. Our typical response might be something like, well, maybe you didn't study quite as hard as you think you did, right? We're like, aha, got him, right? I knew they should have studied more and now I can show them that I was right. Soon as we do that, you're never on my side. That's not true. That's not fair. Now we have a fight on our hands. Instead, we might try. I can totally see how frustrating it would feel if it seemed like an unfair grade. And if my kid really does think it's unfair, of course they're frustrated. I still might eventually want my kid to study more, but if I start with validation, I have a better chance of eventually having that conversation in a collaborative way versus our typical response, which immediately shuts the conversation down. Let's say we have a kid who thinks they're not good enough. And that's just heartbreaking as a parent, right? We hate to hear things like that. So our typical response is often something like, of course that isn't true, you're perfect. And our kid says, you have to say that, you're my dad. Or you don't even know what you're talking about. Or you're such a loser, you don't get it anymore, right? And instead we might try something like, I see things differently, but sometimes when we feel low, our brains come up with thoughts like that. And again, that's true. That does happen when we feel anxious or when our mood tanks, right? So in that moment, I'm not going to convince my kid that I'm right anyways. My best shot is just to help them feel like I can understand how hard it is in the moment. Last example, let's say you have a teen who's really mad about a limit that you set, and we say something like, I'm doing this for your own good, right? We're just waiting for our kid to say, you're right, mother, right? It's not going to happen. I have a better shot with, I get why you're mad. It must feel really frustrating that I'm putting my foot down on this. And again, if you scale back, you can get that. You can probably genuinely empathize. I also don't like when people tell me what I can and can't do, right? It's annoying. This is not my moment to try to convince my child that my parenting decision is right. It's not their job to see things my way. It's my job to set a limit and to try to stay connected with my kid. Couple of tips to help validation go a little more smoothly. You want to avoid buts in your validation. I get that you're really anxious, but it makes sense that you're mad. But as soon as we do that, we've moved away from validation. Kid knows that we're about to start problem solving or dismissing their perspective. And again, we've lost the conversation and the chance to connect. So you're just going to stop the sentence and put a period on it. I know you're really anxious, period. I understand that you're really mad, period. That's it. We're going to sit there. And we're going to sit there for 3 to 5 validating statements. Oftentimes, parents will come back to me and they say, Andrea, I tried validation, it didn't work. And I have them give me a little sample of what it sounded like. And they did validate one time. And then they quickly moved on to problem solving or perspective taking. And their kid just wasn't ready yet. They were still too dysregulated to be skillful. They just needed more validation. So you're going to sit there for at least 3 to 5 attempts. And then I really want parents to be patient with validation over time. So I often hear that when parents first try validation, kids come back and they're like, why are you talking like that? Or why are you being so weird? Or you're just saying that. They don't trust that the validation is genuine because they're not really used to it. So that doesn't mean we abandon the skill. It means that we need to work a little harder, have a little more patience in creating a new dynamic and pattern. So we're going to stick with that validation over time. And eventually the kid will really start to see and build faith in the fact that you do mean it. And you really are trying to perspective take, and it's not just a ploy to get them to do what you want. Okay, so we've built this really nice warm foundation. We're understanding where our kids are coming from. We're looking for context. We're having one-on-one time or conflict-free zone. We're validating. All beautiful. There still might be problem behaviors that emerge that we want to manage, and we can do that through consequences as we need to. By consequence here, I just mean outcome, right? So I know colloquially we say consequences like a punishment. Here I just mean what happens next. Your kid does something, what's the outcome? And consequences could be positive or negative. Positive consequences increase behavior, negative consequences decrease behavior. Parents have a few options for different consequences they can use. I'm going to talk through 2. The first one are natural consequences, and the second are logical consequences. So natural consequences are outcomes that are going to happen anyways, as long as you don't get in the way. So a couple examples. It's getting really chilly outside. It's November in New Jersey. We suggest our kid take a jacket on their way to school. They say no. The natural consequence is that they're really cold when it's 35 degrees and they walk to school. It's their responsibility to fill up the water bottle. They forget to do it. The natural consequence is that they're thirsty. You have told them they're in charge of packing their bag every night with homework and they don't bother checking. They forget their homework on the desk. The natural consequence is that they get a minus on their homework. Natural consequences can be positive too. If you have a little kid who's really friendly at the playground, the positive natural consequence is they get invited for a play date. Or your kid studies really hard for that test, and the positive natural consequence is they do well on the grade, right? So there's a couple of pros and cons to natural consequences that I just like parents to think about. One of the best pros is that it requires no extra effort from parents. You're just letting things take their course, right? You don't have to have a system. There's no point chart. You're not trying to do some crazy math thinking, what can I do to convince my kid? You just let the outcome happen. Yay for you. You have enough on your plate. I also think natural consequences can really drive home the link between behavior and outcomes. Oftentimes when parents put a consequence in place, reward or punishment, kids sort of interpret it as parents lording over them. You know, anything that happened is the parents' fault. When we simply don't intervene, it's much more clearly the responsibility of the kid. And I think that can go a long way at shaping behavior over time. A couple of cons. Natural consequences are really hard for parents to tolerate. We don't like thinking about our kid being cold on the walk to school. We don't like thinking about them being thirsty. We don't like the idea that they're going to forget their homework and we've worsened their grade and that the teacher has a negative impression of them, right? It's really a struggle for us to tolerate that. So we really want parents to be thinking about which matters more, this short-term outcome, if I save them, or the long-term lesson over time if I don't save them. Another thing that's tricky is that kids don't always care about the natural outcome. So when they get the minus on their math homework, they don't like math anyways. It was no skin off their back. You care much more than they care. So sometimes the natural consequence isn't quite enough to actually shift behavior as much as we want it to. And the last thing is that natural consequences can play out over a really, really long time, and that can make it harder for kids to connect the dot. So for example, when you have the really kind, respectful kid who always helps out, who always opens the door, who is always really friendly, we as adults know that's going to have beautiful long-term natural consequences in terms of their reputation, how people view them, etc. But that's hard for kids to think about right now in this moment, right? Or they have to study for that test, but it's not for a week and a half, and then grades don't come out for another 2 weeks, and then the midterm grades don't come out for another 2 months, right? Really hard for kids to connect the dots. So part of our job as parents might be to sort of point out these consequences coming down the pipeline to try to make it a little bit more salient for kids. If natural consequences aren't working, either because we can't tolerate them or your kid just doesn't seem to care about them, parents can also use logical consequences, which are just outcomes that make sense based on what your kid did. So they spilled the cup of water, they help clean up the cup of water. They threw the toy, I take the toy. They're really good about getting home on curfew every single night. Maybe I extend their curfew 15 minutes because, I can trust them, right? So outcomes that just make sense. Couple of pros and cons to think about. One of the things I love about logical consequences is parents can decide what they are in real time. So a lot of times we want to use sticker charts or point system, and they totally have their place. Those can be really lovely, but they require a lot of forethought, and that can be hard for some parents. So if I use a logical consequence, I can just see what my kid is doing right now and respond appropriately. Logical consequences also just sort of make sense to everyone involved because they're so directly linked. You didn't fill up the gas when you got home last night. You got to wake up early and fill it up now. I'm not being totally bananas here as a parent. It just makes sense. So I won't guarantee there's no pushback, but I think there's often less pushback with the logical consequence versus you picked some other arbitrary reward or punishment that didn't seem to fit. There can often be a more immediate link between behavior and outcome. So again, if parents are using a sticker chart or a word chart or whatever it is, again, totally lovely. This is not an indictment on those, but the kid is often not getting a major reward until way down the line. And for some kids, that's just not salient enough for them. They need something a little more immediate, and logical consequences can serve that. Couple of cons. Again, kids don't always care about logical consequences. When your 13-year-old smacks your 11-year-old at the dinner table, the logical consequence might be to send the 13-year-old to their room, and they're like, great, I didn't want to hang out with you anyways, right? So sometimes it's just not a powerful outcome for them. Logical consequences can also be really hard for parents to follow through on. So kid misses curfew one day, they're staying out late with their friends. A logical consequence might be that they have to skip the next hangout. That is logical. It makes a lot of sense. But maybe as a parent, I'm really desperate for my kid to feel socially connected. So then when it actually comes to the next hangout, it's super hard for me to hold my boundary. Or my younger child doesn't turn in the iPad when they're supposed to. The logical consequence would be for them to lose some of the iPad time tomorrow. But tomorrow comes and I was banking on that iPad time so I could get some work done or cook dinner or whatever it is. So it can be really tricky. I said that one of the pros is that parents can think of logical consequences in real time, and I do mean that. I think it can be an advantage, but I also think it can be a disadvantage because parents have to be quick on their feet. And because it's not a system that we've implemented over time, we're often more susceptible to our own emotions. If we're really angry or really anxious or what have you, the consequence we come up with can maybe be out of scale or a little inappropriate for what's at hand. So we just have to be really mindful that as the parent that we're reacting to the child's behavior, not our own emotional response. Two main tips for parents who are using consequences. The first is to aim for small chunks of a consequence, whether that's a positive or a negative consequence. So if you take away the kid's entire screen time because they cursed once, cool, but they have nothing to lose. So now they can curse the entire rest of the day. If you gave them a shopping spree for one good test grade, I'm sure they love that, but they have very little motivation to study hard the rest of the semester. So it's a much better bet to take tiny chunks of a consequence. Take 5 to 10 minutes of screen time. Give them $5 for that good grade, something small, and then you'll have more currency to motivate behavior over time. The last piece is to be consistent. And we all sort of know this, but it's easier said than done. And I often find that with kids and parents, it's sort of a game of chicken to see who's going to cave first. And because parents tend to be so much more emotionally invested than kids are quick to win that game. If they act like they don't care, or alternatively put a big enough fight up, they sort of know that parents are going to back down. So if we want consequences to be effective, we really have to commit to following through on them over time. It's not just about sort of threatening something today and hoping it works. It's telling your kids what's going to happen, following through on it today and tomorrow and the next 10 times it happens. And that's when the kid's brain is going to say, okay, it was not a fluke that my parents actually followed through. This is truly a change in what's happening. I have to make a different choice here. If we're only consistent 50% of the time, if we cave a bunch, kid has no reason to change their behavior. So we really want to make sure that whatever consequence option we pick, we feel comfortable following through over time. Here's the real beauty of these two domains between building connection and consequences. They work together really well. If you understand your kid more, if you spend time with them, if you help them feel connected, you're going to see fewer problem behaviors, which means you won't have to rely as heavily on consequences. And if you do have to rely on a consequence, it's okay. You aren't going to tank the entire relationship because you followed through on no play date tomorrow. And that's because you've invested so much time, you've built up so much credibility in your relationship with all those connection building strategies. Alternatively, or rather on the other side of the coin, I often find that consequences can preserve relationship as well, which seems counterintuitive. We think that if we're punishing our kid or making every reward contingent on certain behavior, that it's going to put a strain. But I often find that external consequences allow parents to step back emotionally. When my kid does something wrong, I don't have to shame them. There's no guilt trip. I'm not begging. I'm not lecturing. I'm not yelling or trying to, coerce them into better behavior by leveraging my relationship. If I'm using an external consequence or I let that natural consequence play out, I can actually take a step back. I can continue to validate. I continue to be there in praise. I'm just letting the outcome occur, and that's going to shape my behavior. So when you work on both building connection and implementing consistent consequences, they're going to really sort of optimize each other. All right, last thing, I just want to note a couple of additional resources. There's a couple of lovely books on here that sort of go through specific parenting skills for particular diagnoses, like ODD or ADHD. The Lisa Coyne book is a more general parenting book for younger kids. And then I have my book on here as well, which is going to cover some foundational parenting skills. The examples are teen geared, but they're really sort of applicable no matter how old your kid is. And again, I receive royalties for any book purchases. I'm going to pause here, welcome any questions, and I will stop my share so I can actually see everyone's faces.
Thank you so much. When the Chancellor and I envisioned this series, we wanted it to be skills and strategies focused, which sometimes with academics is hard. We want to talk about a lot of background, and you just exemplified a presentation that just got into the skills and strategies and applied quickly and in a way that I could understand, and I'm so grateful for that.
I appreciate the opportunity.
So at this point, because there are so many of us on the call, we're going to use the chat feature for questions. So thank you for all the nice hands coming up, and it was a beautiful presentation. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will read them out in the order that we received them.
Do you have any recommendations on how to help parents when the child's behavior is school refusal? This could be a 5-part talk. Brian Chu might talk about this a little bit when he talks about anxiety at the end of the series. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple things. I think all the things I discussed are still applicable here, right? We really want parents to be paying attention to context. There's lots of different reasons why kids school refuse. It might be that something in school itself is really aversive, either socially or academically. There might be a separation picture at hand. They might be feeling really depressed, right? So I want to have a better picture of what the context for that kid's school refusal is. And then see if I can increase supports to help manage that. So, if it's a peer issue, are we working on social skills? Are we talking to school counselors? If it's an academic issue, are they for sure in the right level of class? Do they have the right academic support? If it's a separation issue, then we're talking more anxiety management skills across the board, right? So I'm understanding context and I'm seeing if there's any sort of bigger picture resources or supports that we need to put in place. I really want to make sure I'm being validating as well. It does not help to fight with your kid every morning when they're staying in bed and saying, why do we do this every day? It's no different. You have to go to school. You don't have a choice. They know that. You know that. It's not going to get you anywhere, right? So I'm much more inclined to have parents come in and say, I know this is really hard. It feels really stressful. And I'm still going to make use of consequences, right? So if you're home all day, you don't get access to Wi-Fi and your video games. If you are able to get to school, you do have access to your phone, right? So I'm using all those skills I talked about, extra resources, extra support, validation, trying to build connection overall, and I can use consequences if I need to shape that behavior above and beyond the other skills. Okay, let's see. Other questions. Any resources we can recommend to teachers to build one-on-one connection with students who are facing defiant issues? Do I have any books or videos? I don't know that I have books specifically for teachers. Josh, feel free to intervene if you have something on one-on-one time for teachers. I do think any of the material from PCIT International, I talk about one-on-one time in my book as well. It's not that teachers are going to do special time with every single one of their kids, but I think the general principles of selective attention, praise, reflecting, ignoring minor problem behavior, I do think that's really useful in a school setting when teachers as a class are good at acknowledging little pieces of praise. They're good at keeping sort of attention questions, keeping the level of engagement up. I think we tend to see fewer problem behaviors. So that's sort of what I would go to. Okay, there was a question about, curious about the 5-minute dose of positive attention. Any experience with implementing a higher dose? With what outcome? So the PCIT research uses 5 minutes, and that seems to be an adequate amount of time, both to fill that attention cup, but also for parents to practice skills. I will just say anecdotally, kids love one-on-one time, right? They desperately want 15, 20, 30 minutes, and sometimes parents will do it, and then it gets really overwhelming, and they stop it altogether. So when I work with parents in sessions, I'll say to them, if you actually have 20 minutes on any given day, that's awesome. Go for it. But set your 5-minute timer, and that's your one-on-one time practice. At the end of that, engage how you would normally so you don't burn out and then abandon it altogether. Okay, really great question. Any recommendations on how we can motivate parents who have lost hope in practicing parenting strategies? It's really hard. Parenting is so hard, right? It can feel really demoralizing. So a couple of things. I think as providers, we really want to validate how tricky it is for parents. I think parents get a really bad rap in society. There's constant judgment of what they're doing or not doing, or they should know better, what have you. And they only have so much control. So I really want to validate for parents how hard it is, how stuck they must feel, how tricky it is to feel like you're doing everything you can and you're still not seeing outcomes. A lot of times I'll talk with parents about the fact that, again, when they've come to see me, I might be the second or third or fourth person they've seen. They do kind of feel hopeless often. A lot of parents are doing the skills like 80% right, but that 20% really, really matters. These little details, these little tweaks can make a huge difference, both in terms of sort of the sustainability of implementing at home, but also just parents' sort of own response to how they feel to do emotionally. And I think that is promising to parents. It's not that they're totally off base, but they're not wrong that 80% hasn't been enough to see it, and that's okay. I'm going to help you problem solve. The other thing, I stole this analogy from a former mentor, so I can't take credit, but he would say, I'm going to give you these parenting skills, and I'm sending you out on a raft, and there are going to be leaks in the raft. Like, things are going to go wrong, right? But then you're going to come back, and you're going to tell me where the leaks are, and we're going to patch them together. So we're a team. We know there's going to be problems. Kids are very clever, right? They're going to find workarounds, and that's okay. As smart as they are, we can be smart too. Really just try to sort of build a little extra motivation. Okay, another great question. Parents sometimes disagree on parenting strategies, specifically validation. Best way to handle this. Yeah, this comes up all the time. So I would say in general, not just validation, but in general, I want to help parents think about what are their values in their family? What do they want to see for their kids and for their dynamic? And most parents have completely understandable values, right? So as it pertains to validation, they might feel strongly about having a more hierarchical boundary in their household, or they're really big on a sense of parent control or parent respect. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? But they also have the value of their child feeling healthier or feeling happier. And sometimes, unfortunately, those might come into conflict with each other. So then we have to have a conversation about, hey, I totally get if you don't want to validate. That might be sort of counter to how you were raised or your norms or some of the other values you might have. I get that. Is upholding those worth sacrificing this other value that you have? Usually when you frame it like that, I think it can go a long way at helping parents sort of gain perspective on the importance of these skills. And if they ultimately choose not to do validation or whatever skill you recommended, that's their choice as a parent. It's not my job to tell them how to make individual decisions with their kids. But then when things don't change, I'm giving them instruction on how to not blame the kid. If we didn't do validation and then kid doesn't come to talk to us about things, we kind of have to accept that. We can't really fairly be mad at kid when they knew coming in they were going to have some judgment around that. So again, either trying to work with values to see if maybe a different approach than what they're using might help prioritize a little more effectively. And if not, how can they tolerate the fact that they're not seeing the outcomes they want? Okay, let's see. Any tips on addressing different consequences for different kids of the same household? Good distress tolerance for parents. It's really hard. I usually tell parents it's up to you, whichever is least annoying. Some parents say, I'd rather have the same consequence for every kid. It's worth the extra effort just to not deal with the battle of what's being unfair. And some parents say, no, I can't do it. I'd rather deal with my kid complaining. I can't possibly replicate, a chore chart for every single kid when two of my kids don't need it and only one does. I don't know that I have a strong feeling one way or the other. It's really what's most sustainable for the parent. In terms of the kids complaining about it, I think it's okay to have a sort of genuine conversation with the kids that say, look, everyone's different. It might be really frustrating to you that you have X and they don't. Fair enough. Doesn't change the fact that as a parent, I got to do what's best for each of you. And that's what this is right now. I have no problem. That's the genuine answer. I have no problem communicating that to them. And then I have to sort of tolerate their frustration, which again, I can actually understand. It makes sense. I would be frustrated too. Okay, let's see. There's lots of questions, so I'm just trying to look through a little bit. Okay, what can parents do when their connection with their child is so strong that as a young adult still depends on them too much and overshares? Okay, that's a really good question. So I want to think a little bit about how parents can challenge their young adult to be a little more independent and functional on their own. And that might be through praise, right? Or a compliment sandwich. I love how close we are. It's really beautiful. I also think you're more capable than you think you are. So I want to practice handling this on your own, and then you can tell me when it's done. I really think this is going to be great for you, right? So I don't have to berate my kid or shame my kid. It's really lovely that they want to share, but they might not be seeing themselves as capable as the parents see them. So parents can communicate that. And then if kid has a hard time following the boundaries that you're trying to establish, parents have to sort of stick to them themselves. So if kid is calling them 4 times a day, when they're off at college, and parents are like, I kind of think we can stick with 1 time a day, that's fine. Parents have to not pick up the phone the other 3 times. Give the kid a chance to see I was actually capable of handling it even when they didn't answer. And then that should, in turn, change some of their sort of self-perception on this. All right, let's see. Um, Sorry, I saw one from up above. How can parents respond to bullying? I think the validation, again, goes a long way. This is really tricky because there's totally a social dynamic where if parents intervene, kids can get more pushback. And I also do think that sometimes kids sort of end up being left to their own devices for really problematic behaviors. I guess what I would recommend is, again, let's understand the full context. Was this a one-off? Is it a pattern? How severe is it? No matter what, I'm going to validate my kid. I'm going to try to do some family problem solving with them, right? What do we think are options here? I can talk to your teacher. You can talk to your teacher. Do we want to practice ignoring them? Do we want to talk to the guidance counselor? Do we want to try to help you make sure you're with your buddies all the time so you have some backup? So rather than just jumping into save immediately, can parents help kids sort of problem solve on their own to see what may make sense? And again, assuming there's not a safety issue at play here, I don't mind letting the kids sort of try it out, see if it can go anywhere. That can be really sort of self-validating for kids if they're able to be effective. If not, then we might have to escalate. And by the way, we already had evidence that kid really tried to manage this on their own and it still didn't go anywhere. So there's more justification for parents to jump in. All right. One of my clients, 13, states that all he wants is, I think, is to be outside and is very resistant to limits. How can I help parents navigate this? So I do want parents to think a little bit about if their limits are completely fair. I'm guilty of this. Sometimes as parents, we don't want to say yes to stuff because it's just kind of annoying for us, right? Like it's kind of frustrating for us to deal with that kid's choice. So we say no really quickly, when in fact, maybe the 13-year-old can be outside and is safe and responsible. And yeah, it'd be nice if we had a little more time at home, but actually being outside is a really good thing. So I want to make sure that parents' limits are really reasonable for this family context. And then I want to make sure that any consequences that are put in place are also reasonable. So it can't just be parents, laying down the law with a heavy hammer. Kids just going to get really frustrated and resistant. Can I have some rewards in place for following the limits? So if you're home by 5:30 every day, Monday through Thursday, you can earn an extra hour and a half of outside time on Friday. So it doesn't just feel punitive. We're doing something to try to motivate more skillful behavior over time. There are a few more questions, but I see that we have 1 minute left. So I
Yeah,
think we might need to wrap up. But I
we
appreciate all the
do.
thoughtful questions.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Temkin-Yu. You have set a very high bar for this series, especially for answering questions on the spot in a thoughtful and applied manner. Super grateful for you taking the time and sharing your expertise with us today.